Okay, welcome back, economists. We are here to think about our first type of what was referred to as a market structure on the previous version of the economics guide. And I think it's still useful to refer to it as that. Market structures are just simply a type of market under which we can place a bunch of different examples of types of markets under. Makes pretty good sense that way. So the type that we're going to address here is called perfect competition. So the market structure of perfect competition is not to be confused with a market that works perfectly. There are some issues with this type of market structure, but perfect competition sort of gets at what the first assumption here is. It says large number of small firms in a lot of economics textbooks. Probably a better way to say that is an infinite number of firms, right? As in, there's always going to be more firms operating in this market in the future. And one thing to keep in mind as we go through the assumptions here is that this market is mostly theory. And it is good to compare to other types of market structures, but it's actually quite difficult to find a real concrete example of a market that is without a doubt operating in perfect competition. What often happens is sometimes individual markets do operate with some of these assumptions, but also a mix of assumptions from other types of market structures. So this is more sort of a theory thing to begin with. Okay, so a very, very large number of small firms, right? One firm does not have the ability to set the market price. Okay, one firm in relation to the entire size of the market is pretty insignificant. Okay, so then we have no barriers. Okay, if you want to start up a business in this field, it's going to be pretty easy to do. And you should be able to do that pretty quickly. Number 3 is interesting. Identical products. Every business is basically selling the same thing. There's no real discernible difference between one firm's products and another. The closest example we can come up with this, at least, is agriculture, right? If you're going to go to the store and buy apples, most grocery stores sell more or less the same apple, right? So that's probably the best example that we can think of here is agricultural products. In relation to point number 1 above, firms in this market are price takers. In other words, they cannot set a price for their own products. They have to sell their products at the market price, and that is because the size of their business is so small in relation to the entire size of a very large market, they just don't have a significant impact on that. Okay? So because businesses are price takers, there's only the idea of normal profit in the long run. So normal profit basically happens when revenues equal costs, right? Essentially, a business is making enough money to stay in business, but they're not profitable, at least from the point of owning a business, right? There's not extra money in addition to the total costs of the business. The revenue and the costs are equal. Okay, and there are no abnormal profits or abnormal losses in the long run. That is because of this idea there being no barriers. We're going to talk through that in a second. So these are all assumptions of perfect competition. And remember that we're on the idea of market power, right? Market power. And it's important to unpack what that idea means. So market power just simply means that one business has the ability to impact the price, their own price, or the market price. So in that way, firms in perfect competition typically don't have much market power. They are more or less reacting to what the market is doing. Okay, so let me talk you through the graph. We're going to do a local example here first in Central Florida, which is one of the most productive places in the world for making citrus, so we're going to go with oranges. If you go to the store and buy oranges, they're more or less the same thing. They're identical. And businesses even cooperate together to establish a market price per weight for oranges, so that's the one we're going to go with. So operating under the assumption that there's identical products and there's a market price, that has an implication on what our demand curve is going to look like. Previously, we have used a demand curve that is downward sloping, right? And we've usually done that on a 45-degree angle, but we're not going to do that this time around. We're going to use a demand curve that is perfectly elastic. Okay, so let me show you what that looks like. The demand curve, a perfectly elastic demand curve, is straight across. It is exactly horizontal. Okay, and if we are trying to show the idea that there's only normal profit in the long run, we're going to have this demand curve intersect at this point. I'll get to what that means in a second, but here is our demand curve. Okay, so this level, that line I just drew there, that is the market price. So we're going to label that P. That is the market price. One individual firm does not have the ability to change that price. They have to sell at whatever it is. Okay, if you recall from the tables that we worked with on rational producer behavior, if you recall the tables that we worked with on rational producer behavior, you will remember that the demand curve here is essentially average revenue. Same thing, right? But then it's also marginal revenue because there's the market price. If a business sells one more thing, that's going to be in addition to whatever the market price is. Okay? So, a couple things here. You need to find the point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. That is the profit maximizing point. That is where businesses will produce, and that point is here. Okay, so we're going to call that Q1. Now, this is where we find the quantity, right? And we find the cost as a result of where Q1, okay, where Q1 hits the average cost curve, that will give us the cost per unit. So in that way, it's the same thing, okay? So our price is the market price at what we're making. The costs are established here, right? We find Q1, attach that up to the average cost curve. Price is equal to cost. That basically means total revenue is equal to total cost. This is the long run outcome for businesses. This is where they operate. This is, most of the time, this is what's going to be happening. Now, there are some instances where I'm going to talk you through here where a business can, in perfect competition, can make abnormal profit and they can make a loss, but that's only going to be for the short term. Okay, so we're going to start this diagram the same way we did here. We're going to draw the marginal cost and the average cost curves first. Okay, so one thing to remember is that basically your marginal cost curve is the same as the supply curve. Okay, and that's really what a supply curve represents. And this looks pretty similar to a supply curve. It is upward sloping. This part here we're going to not really go into explanation there, but that's what marginal cost is, right? It is the cost to a business as a result of producing one more. It's shown in a linear way here, so that's the way we're going to start this one, right? Remember, this graph here is going to be abnormal profit, but only in the short run. Okay, so here we go, marginal cost. Again, that's the same thing as supply. Okay, and then we're going to give ourselves the average cost curve. You want to show average cost hitting marginal cost? at the lowest point. If you watched the video about economies of scale and the law of diminishing returns, this is where businesses want to be producing to minimize their costs. Okay? So, let's say for whatever reason the price in the market for oranges is really high. Maybe seasonally it's in demand, something like that. Okay? So, if demand is high, if we have a perfectly elastic demand curve, we're just going to simply draw it higher than this, right? So maybe demand is here. For whatever reason, the market price is high, okay? That is the price of the market there, of which this individual business here doesn't have any control, right? So again, this is the demand curve. That is equal to the average revenue curve. Same idea as the marginal revenue curve. Remember, the 2 points that we need to find here are the profit maximizing point, where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Okay, that point is going to be here. Another way to think about this point, it's the same thing as supply and demand. This is our supply curve. This is our demand curve, just sort of shown different ways, right? So there's our point at which we will be producing. That gives us our price, okay? And then this point here, where the quantity point hits the average cost curve, we're going to connect that over to the price axis. That is our cost, okay? Now you might notice for every unit of output, the price is higher than the cost to produce that thing. So all of this is a temporary situation. All of this is abnormal profit. Okay? All of that is abnormal profit. But it can't stay that way, though, because if you remember all the way back when we were learning about supply and demand, one of the things that we talked about is that one of the determinants of supply is the expectation of future prices or the expectation of future profits. So, remember that there are no barriers in perfect competition. If other farmers see that other businesses are making abnormal profits growing oranges, well, they're going to choose to do the same thing, right? And they will join the market for making oranges. Now, if other producers join the market for oranges, the supply is going to increase and drive the price down. Okay, so we can show that with just a simple supply and demand diagram. Supply increases, and we know that when that happens, the price comes down, quantity increases. Okay, so if we're thinking about that on this graph, if an increase in supply in the market drives down the market price for oranges, we'll show the same thing here, and we're going to have a new demand curve and a new market price basically here, okay? That's going to come down, right? And then we're back to the situation that we had here, where costs and price are the same thing, and then we have normal profit again in the long run, okay? So I'm going to talk you through the same situation here with abnormal, well, not abnormal loss. There is no such thing as abnormal loss. Losses are always abnormal. Just the idea of economic loss, where temporarily the costs are going to be greater than the price per unit, which is the opposite of this outcome. This is a great thing to happen in the short run, but again, it's only the short run. The market will correct that and bring the price back down. Okay, so same way that we started with the other stuff. There's marginal cost, average cost hits its bottom point where it intersects with marginal cost. Okay, and then let's say for whatever reason there's really low prices in the market for oranges. Maybe people don't want to buy them because there's been a health scare or something like that. Whatever. So there's really low prices for oranges. We would show that about here. Okay, so that is the price. And again, this is demand equals average revenue equals marginal revenue. We would find our output where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Again, that point is here. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying demand and supply. And then we would find our costs per unit where this point hits our average cost curve. Okay? And if you are selling something and the cost to produce it is greater than the cost to sell it, then you have the problem of an economic loss. This business is losing money. So maybe they can stay in the market, right? But remember, what we're dealing with here usually is a small firms, right? They typically don't have a lot of cash on hand to deal with setbacks like this. So what will happen is a lot of businesses that are experiencing this problem, they will drop out of the market, or they will maybe just temporarily stop producing. Okay, so if a bunch of businesses do that and enough businesses do that, then the supply, the market supply for oranges will decrease. That will drive up the price. Fewer oranges will be sold there. Okay, and then this does what we needed to do here, at least if we're thinking about the owner of this business. This business has no ability to control the market price, but the market price will increase once other businesses are forced to drop out of the market. When that happens, it will eventually go up to the point where we have demand equals average revenue, marginal revenue. This is the second one. So basically the market price is going to move up. Okay? So this is the long-term outcome. This is the most important graph to remember. These are the assumptions to remember. And big picture, why is this type of market structure important? Well, it's about the only market structure that doesn't have any degree of market power. They have to take the market price, wherever that is, and they have to make sure that they are as efficient as possible, and they charge the lowest prices, or they have the lowest costs that they possibly can in relation to the price, right? So no real market power here with firms in perfect competition, but it is a good starting point for thinking about comparing this to other market structures, which we will cover in a future video. Okay? Thanks, guys.